The echo of my heels against the marble floor was the only sound I could hear when I entered the courtroom. Each step landed like a hammer, yet inside my legs trembled as if they could collapse any second. I kept my head high, clutching the leather folder against my chest. I had spent my life restoring masterpieces hidden under centuries of grime. Yet today, it was my own name that needed restoration. Laura, my daughter-in-law, was already seated with her lawyer. I saw the faint curl of a smile tugging at the corner of her lips as she slid a stack of documents across the polished oak table. My son Daniel sat beside her, eyes down, as if he couldn't bear to look at me. "Your Honor," Laura's lawyer announced, his voice sharp and confident, "we submit this power of attorney signed by Mrs. Enso Marlowe, granting full rights to her estate." The words fell like shards of glass. Power of attorney, estate, my estate. My hand instinctively reached for the folder I held, feeling the edges cut into my palm. The air smelled of paper, varnished wood, and something sour, the betrayal of my own blood. The judge lifted the papers, adjusted his spectacles, and for a moment, his expression was unreadable. Then his gaze flicked to me, lingering, narrowing, as though he were seeing not just a woman, but a ghost from another life. His lips parted. But you are Elena Marlowe? The Elena Marlowe who restored the Madonna of the Shadows in Florence, 1987. A silence dropped over the room, so heavy it seemed to press against my ribs. Even the court stenographer's fingers froze above the keys. Daniel's head snapped up, confusion flashing in his eyes. Laura's smirk faltered. Yes, I thought, I am that woman. I am not the frail mother-in-law you've been whispering about, not the senile old woman you hope to erase with forged papers. I am Elena Marlowe. My name had once carried weight in the hushed halls of European museums, in the cloisters of Florence where time stood still. And now, that name filled this sterile courtroom like a storm cloud. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to meet the judge's stare. I felt every gaze fixed on me, peeling back the years of sacrifice, the decades of silence. My heartbeat thundered, my fingers ached from gripping the folder, but I didn't look away. Laura shifted in her chair. I heard the whisper of fabric as she crossed her legs, trying to regain composure. Your Honor, she said, her voice suddenly brittle, my mother-in-law is confused. Whatever she did in Italy years ago has nothing to do with the matter at hand. Her words stung, but they also sparked something in me, a flame I thought had long been extinguished. Confused? I had spent decades bending over canvases, deciphering brushstrokes invisible to the naked eye, resurrecting saints and Madonnas from the shadows of time. My hands had held centuries of history. Confused was the last thing I was. The judge's eyes never left me. Is this your signature on these papers, Mrs. Marlowe? He asked quietly, as though the weight of the entire courtroom rested on my answer. I felt the blood drain from my face. My pulse hammered in my temples. I wanted to scream, to demand why my own children would do this to me. Instead, I pressed my shaking hands against the folder and whispered, "No, that is not my hand. That is not my will." Gasps rippled through the benches. Daniel's jaw tightened. He still wouldn't look at me. My chest burned with a mixture of shame and fury, betrayal and grief. I thought of the nights I had stayed awake transferring money to cover his debts. The days I had sold off my treasures, books, antiques, even one of my restored canvases to keep him afloat. And here he sat, letting his wife hold the knife to my throat. In that instant, something inside me shifted. This battle wasn't about the house, or even the money. It wasn't just about proving my signature had been forged. It was about reclaiming the one thing they had tried to strip away, my name, my dignity, my very identity. The silence lingered, thick and unbearable. Then I lifted my chin, my voice steadier than I expected. And I know, I said, letting the words cut through the still air, that this trial is not only about keeping my home, it is about defending the only thing I have left, my name and my dignity. The hook snapped tight. The fight had begun. The brush is still with me. A slender handle of dark wood, the bristles worn but intact, tucked inside a cedar box I keep on the top shelf of my wardrobe. Whenever I open that box, the scent of turpentine seems to rise from memory itself. That brush is the door to another life, the life I abandoned 20 years ago. I close my eyes, and I am 27 again, standing in Florence, my hands steady as I leaned over the canvas of Madonna of the Shadows. My brush traced each stroke with reverence, peeling away centuries of soot to reveal colors that had not breathed since the 15th century. People whispered my name in the corridors of museums. Back then, I thought my career would last forever, but forever ended sooner than I expected. When Daniel was born, I told myself I could balance both worlds, art and family. For a time, I did. I flew back and forth between Florence and London, carrying jars of pigments in my luggage, bringing him trinkets from Italy. But when he was 12, his father left. Suddenly, my life was reduced to bills stacked like bricks and silence where promises should have been. So I made a choice. I left the art world behind. In 2002, the London Art Guild invited me to restore a small private collection. I declined. I told them I was on sabbatical. The truth? I was pouring every ounce of my strength into raising Daniel, paying tuition fees, and keeping food on the table. By 2005, I had sold most of my library of rare books, 78 volumes, including a 15th century facsimile, for a total of $24,600. Every penny went into Daniel's schooling. Later, in 2010, I parted with something more painful. I agreed to auction a painting I had personally restored, a modest Venetian piece, nothing world famous, but one that bore my signature care. The hammer fell at $80,000. I never saw a single dollar of it for myself. The entire sum went into Daniel's first company, a logistics startup he swore would make him independent. I can still hear his words. "Mom, art doesn't put food on the table. Give me this money and I'll build something real." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. I signed over the funds without hesitation, smiling as he hugged me, telling myself I was investing in my son's future. That night, I returned to my small flat, opened the cedar box, and ran my fingers over the sable brush. I whispered to it like a prayer. "You understand, don't you? One day, he'll repay this sacrifice." He never did. The years blurred into a carousel of invoices, emergencies, and Daniel's endless requests. "Just one more transfer, Mom. The bank is breathing down my neck." Or, "Laura needs help covering the lease." Always urgent, always framed as temporary. I wired the money again and again, even when it meant cutting corners for myself, living on instant noodles, skipping dentist appointments, postponing new glasses when mine broke. Each time I told myself, family comes first, my art can wait. But art doesn't wait. It slipped further and further away until even colleagues stopped asking when I would return. My name, once spoken in reverent tones in Florence, was now barely a whisper in my own home. Sometimes I would open the cedar box late at night, alone in the kitchen. I would lift the brush and feel its weight in my hand. Once, that brush had felt like a wand, capable of bringing dead saints back to life. Now, it felt heavy with dust and regret. Daniel noticed once. He walked into the kitchen and saw me holding it. "Mom, why do you keep that old thing?" "It's useless." I swallowed hard and forced a smile. "It reminds me of who I was." He laughed, actually laughed, and said, "You were an artist. Now you're a mother. That's all that matters." His words stung, but I bit my tongue. I told myself he didn't mean harm. After all, he was my son. Yet deep inside, something cracked. The manipulation wasn't always cruel. It was subtle, dressed in the clothes of affection. He would call me the best mom in the world, right before asking for another transfer. Laura would bring me flowers and say how much she admired my sacrifice, but only when they needed my signature on something. Their kindness always had a price tag. and I kept paying. By 2050, I had wired over 250,000 in total. I knew the numbers. I kept a notebook hidden under my mattress where I wrote down every transfer. I thought if I tracked it, it would give me a sense of control. Instead, it only reminded me how quickly I was bleeding myself dry. Still, whenever guilt pricked me, I reached for excuses. He's my only child. He's trying. It's not his fault the world is so hard. But sometimes at night, when the flat was quiet, the truth whispered back, "It's not the world, Elena. It's him. He's using you." I didn't want to believe it. There were early warning signs, of course, foreshadowings I brushed aside. Like the day Laura borrowed the keys to my study and I later found the cedar box moved, the brush slightly out of place. Or the afternoon Daniel snapped when I hesitated to send money. "Do you want me to fail, Mom? After everything you've given up, don't you dare waste it all now." His tone was sharp, his eyes cold. For a second, I glimpsed something frightening in him, a hunger I didn't recognize. But I told myself I was imagining it. I closed the box and placed it back on the shelf. And I whispered again, this time more desperately, "He'll change. He has to change." But even as I said it, my heart knew otherwise. I had given up my career, my art, my money, and piece by piece, my dignity. And the brush, the only remnant of the artist I once was, remained as both proof of my sacrifice and a reminder of my mistake. I thought I was saving my family. In truth, I was erasing myself. When I was 25, I thought the world had opened its arms to me. I still remember the first time I was alone inside the chapel of Santa Maria Novella, the air thick with incense and centuries of dust. My hands trembled as I stood before a canvas darkened by time, its colors suffocated beneath layers of soot and neglect. The smell of linseed oil and turpentine clung to the air. My brush hovered over the surface, and I was terrified. Terrified that one wrong stroke could erase history itself. That night, after hours bent over the altar painting, I signed my name on the first international contract of my career. Elena Marlowe, restorer. My handwriting was small, almost shy, but it was there. My hand shook so much that the ink bled at the edges, but I did not care. The contract was proof that I belonged in that world of masters and masterpieces. For a brief moment, I believed I was invincible. And yet, even in those years of triumph, I was never without fear. Fear of failure, of not being enough, of being unworthy of the works entrusted to me. I would stand so long at the scaffold that my legs went numb, my body aching, but I told myself, this is what it means to dedicate your life to art. Years later, when Daniel was born, a different kind of trembling overtook me. He was small, his fists like tiny knots, his cries raw and insistent. Suddenly, the weight of responsibility dwarfed any canvas I had ever touched. I was no longer just Elena the Restorer. I was Mum, and that title was heavier than any contract. One afternoon, when he was about 5, Daniel climbed onto my lap while I sat sketching. The studio light filtered through the curtains, landing in dusty strips across the floor. He grabbed the sable brush from the table with his sticky little fingers, dipping it into blue paint before I could stop him. A streak of blue ran across the paper, crooked and wild, but his eyes lit up with pride. "Mum," he asked, looking up at me with such earnestness, "can I paint the sky like you do?" I laughed, though my eyes stung with sudden tears. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered, "you can paint the sky however you like." He kept scribbling, his small hand gripping the brush too tightly, leaving uneven lines. I tore a piece of scrap paper from my sketch pad and slid it beneath his hand. The result was a messy scribble loops of blue, uneven strokes. But to me, it was more beautiful than any Madonna I had restored. I kept that piece of paper. I folded it gently, tucked it into the cedar box beside my brush, and closed the lid as if I were sealing a relic. That child's scrawl became my second relic, my second motif. It was not a masterpiece to the world, but to me, It was proof of love, of beginnings, of innocence, untainted by hunger for money or status. Over the years, whenever Daniel grew distant or harsh, whenever his demands grew sharper, I would open that box and look at the crooked blue lines. I would trace them with my fingertip, remembering the boy who once asked if he could paint the sky. It was the boy I kept trying to save, even as the man he became kept tearing pieces away from me. Sometimes, in the darkest moments, I would press that paper against my chest and whisper, "Where did you go, my son? Where is the child who believed the sky could be painted with his own hands?" The answer never came. Now, standing in court decades later, I realize I was never just fighting for my house or my name. I was fighting for that memory, that fragile scrap of blue, for the proof that once, long ago, there had been love uncorrupted by greed. And as I fold the memory back into my heart, I feel the ache rise in my throat. The words push against my ribs, too heavy to keep inside. I gave up the artist I could have been to raise the son I thought I had. That was the price I paid, and it broke me in ways no ruined canvas ever could. It was a quiet afternoon when I heard it, the soft scrape of metal against metal, the sound of a key turning in the old cabinet. My study door was ajar, and from the kitchen I caught the faintest creak, like an unwelcome whisper. I froze. My heart stumbled in my chest. That cabinet had not been opened in years, not by anyone but me. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked slowly toward the sound, each step heavy with unease. Through the gap in the doorway, I saw her, Laura, my daughter-in-law. She was crouched before the cabinet, one hand steadying herself on the edge, the other reaching inside. For a second, I thought perhaps I was mistaken, that she was simply tidying. But then the light from the window fell across her hand, and I saw it, a glint of gold. My sable brush, the very brush I had carried across Europe, the brush that had traced the robes of saints and resurrected forgotten skies. It gleamed faintly in her grip, absurdly fragile in the hands of someone who had never known what it meant. A rush of heat climbed my neck. My voice caught in my throat, but I managed to say, "Laura, what are you doing?" She turned sharply, her expression flickering from surprise to irritation. Then she smiled, too quickly. "Oh, Mother," she said lightly, "I was just curious. Such an old brush. It must be worth something, no?" She twirled it between her fingers, careless, like it was a trinket from a flea market. I wanted to snatch it back, to shout that this was not some ornament, but a piece of my soul. Instead, I stepped forward and held out my hand. "Please," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "That brush is not for you." For a moment, she hesitated. Her eyes studied me, calculating, as though weighing how much I would fight for it. Then she placed it in my palm with a shrug. Of course, I didn't mean anything by it. But the brush felt different when I held it again, lighter somehow, as if her touch had stripped it of its sanctity. I closed the cabinet slowly, turning the key with deliberate care, though my fingers trembled. When she left the room, the silence pressed in. I stared at the box, the cedar wood now scarred by the ghost of her intrusion. What was she looking for? Money? Jewelry? Or was it something deeper? Something she wanted to steal that no lock could protect? A thought flickered, unwelcome and sharp. Not money, not things. She's after my legacy. I shook my head, scolding myself for the paranoia. Perhaps she had only been curious. Perhaps I was imagining malice where there was none. I told myself what mothers always tell themselves when unease gnaws at them. I'm overthinking. I'm just being foolish. But that night, when I lay in bed, I could still see the gleam of the brush in her hand, the way her eyes had narrowed for just a moment before she smiled. And for the first time in years, I locked the study door before I went to sleep. Still, even as I turned the key, I whispered into the dark, as if to soothe myself. Maybe I'm only being suspicious. Maybe I'm wrong. But deep down, I already knew I wasn't. It was meant to be a family dinner. At least that's what Daniel told me when he invited me over. "Just a small gathering, Mom," he said on the phone. Laura's cooking. We want you to feel included. I almost believed him. I even dressed with care. My dark navy blouse, the one with pearl buttons I'd saved from my Florence days. I carried a bottle of Chianti, thinking perhaps, just perhaps, we might laugh like we used to. But the moment I entered their dining room, I knew something was wrong. The air was too still, too deliberate. The table was set, candles lit, but there was no warmth. Laura's smile was stretched tight, like a mask she'd forgotten how to remove. Daniel avoided my eyes, fiddling with his phone. We ate in silence, forks scraped against porcelain. I tasted nothing of the food. My heart thudded louder with every passing minute. Then, as dessert plates were cleared, Laura stood. She reached into her leather bag and pulled out a thick bundle of papers. With a sharp flick of her wrist, she dropped them onto the table. The sound was violent, like a gavel slamming down. "Mother," she said, her tone almost casual, "sign these. Once it's done, the house will officially belong to us." For a moment, I didn't understand. My brain refused to process the words. I stared at the stack of documents, the legal headers glaring at me in bold type. My hand tightened around my wine glass, and I felt the stem press into my palm. "Excuse me," I whispered. Laura leaned closer, her perfume sharp, suffocating. "You've had your time, Elena. That house doesn't belong in the hands of the past. Daniel and I, we are the future. You'll still live there, of course, but it will be in our name. A practical step, really." Her voice was honey laced with venom. I turned to my son. "Daniel, is this true?" He finally looked at me, but his eyes were clouded. "Mom," he said softly, "it's just paperwork. You don't need the burden anymore. Think of it as security for all of us." The room blurred. My ears roared with a hollow rush, as if I were drowning. My fingers trembled. Somewhere in the chaos of my chest, my heart whispered, "They've planned this together." And then Laura said it, the sentence that sliced me open. "You're the past, Elena. We are the present." The words pierced deeper than any betrayal I had ever known. I felt something inside me fracture. At that exact moment, I shifted, and the cedar box I had carried with me, my foolish attempt to show them the brush, to remind them of who I was, slipped from my lap. The lid fell open. The sable brush tumbled to the floor. The crack as it snapped in two echoed like a gunshot. I gasped, bending to scoop up the broken pieces. My hands shook so violently that the bristles cut against my skin. That brush had survived decades, travels, restorations. It had been the one constant in my life. And now, shattered on their polished wood floor, it mirrored what they had just done to me. Laura smirked. "Honestly, it was just an old stick. You should let go of these things, Mother." Something in me went cold. I looked at Daniel, hoping, praying for him to say something, to defend me, to remember the boy who once asked if he could paint the sky. But he said nothing. His silence was the cruelest blow of all. I rose slowly, clutching the broken halves of the brush to my chest. My voice was hoarse, but every word was carved from stone. "No," Laura arched an eyebrow. "No, no," I repeated, louder this time. "I will not sign. I will not hand over my home, my life, my name. Not to you, not to anyone." The air thickened. Daniel's jaw tightened. Laura's eyes narrowed. The lines of battle were drawn. In that frozen moment, I realized the truth I had refused to see. There was no going back. The brush had broken, and with it the illusion that love could be bought by sacrifice. I pressed the splintered wood against my palm, feeling its sharp edge bite into my skin. And in the quiet that followed, I heard my own voice in my head, steady and unyielding. That was the moment I understood there was no way back. No more retreat, no more silence. The morning after that dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of tea. The spoon inside the mug had gone still hours ago, its handle tilted like a frozen compass. I hadn't slept. My mind replayed Laura's words on a cruel loop. You're the past. We are the present. The brush lay in front of me, broken into two pieces. I couldn't bring myself to put it back in the cedar box. Every time I touched it, splinters bit into my skin, as if the wood itself was punishing me for my weakness. For years, I had believed that silence was a form of love, that giving, endlessly giving, was proof of devotion. But as I stared at those jagged fragments, I felt something inside me crack wider than the break in the wood. Is this who I am now? A woman waiting for her own child to strip her bare? A shadow in her own house? A mother reduced to signatures and transfers? The questions hit like fists, one after another, each harder than the last. How much more can I lose before there's nothing left? If I give them this house, what will be left of me? If I stay silent, what will they take next? My freedom, my name, my life? The silence in the flat grew unbearable. My chest rose and fell too fast, each breath shallow, ragged. Then, from somewhere deep within, a voice I hadn't heard in decades spoke. Enough. I stood. My knees wobbled, but my steps carried me to the bedroom. I opened the wardrobe and pulled out the metal box where I kept my bank documents. My hand shook as I placed it on the bed. The key turned with a heavy click, a sound that echoed like a verdict. Inside lay the passbooks, the transfer receipts, the notebook where I had written every amount I had given Daniel. Pages and pages of figures stared back at me. 2,000, 10,000, 50,000. A grotesque diary of sacrifice. I ran my fingers over the numbers until the ink blurred through my tears. Then I whispered aloud. Though no one was there to hear me, enough, no more. The words tasted strange on my tongue, sharp, bitter, but also liberating. I reached for my laptop, pulled up my banking page, and hovered over the scheduled transfer. Tomorrow, another 5,000 would leave my account, vanishing into Daniel's latest urgent need. My finger lingered above the mouse. For a moment, I faltered. What if he hates me for this? What if he cuts me out of his life completely? What if I lose him? But then another thought rose, fiercer, cutting through the fear. What if I don't? What if I keep giving until there's nothing left? No house, no dignity, no self. My chest ached with the weight of that possibility. I imagined myself 10 years from now, penniless, nameless, locked away in some home while they lived in my house, dining in my kitchen, telling each other I had been useful once. I could not let that be my ending. With a sharp breath, I clicked Cancel Transfer. The screen blinked, and just like that, the chain broke. A strange silence followed, as if the world itself had paused to witness it. Then, slowly, I felt my shoulders drop, my lungs fill, my heart beat steady. I wasn't done. I opened every account, changed every password, locked every access. My fingers moved quickly now, no longer trembling. Each keystroke felt like hammering nails into a coffin, not mine, but the coffin of the role I had been forced to play. When it was finished, I closed the laptop and returned to the wardrobe. I reached for the cedar box and placed the broken brush and the folded blue scribble inside. My two relics, my two reminders of why I had endured and why I could no longer endure. I closed the lid firmly, turned the key, and pressed the cool metal against my lips like a vow. For the first time in years, the box was locked not to keep the world out, but to keep me in, to remind me of who I was and who I would be again. I stood in the middle of the room, breathing hard. The flat was still the same, walls yellowed, floorboards creaking, kettle hissing faintly. But something had shifted. The air was different. My spine was different. Enough, I whispered once more. Then louder, enough. The word filled the silence like a declaration. That was the morning I stopped being their shadow. That was the morning I chose the light. The silence came first. After I canceled the transfers, there were no calls from Daniel for 3 days. No cheerful "Mom, how are you?" masking a request. No urgent emergencies. Only silence. At first, I almost welcomed it, like a reprieve. But by the fourth day, the quiet began to feel unnatural, like the heavy air before a summer thunderstorm. On the fifth day, a message arrived. Just 4 words glowing on my phone screen. Mom, you'll regret this. My thumb hovered over the screen, the letters burning into my eyes. I wanted to call him, to demand what he meant, but I didn't. I put the phone face down and sat at the table, listening to the clock tick too loudly on the wall. Nights became the hardest. The flat that once felt like a refuge now felt like a cage. I lay awake, hearing every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through the old windows. My chest tightened with dread I couldn't name. One evening, I was in the living room when I heard it, the sharp staccato of heels on wood, Laura's shoes. I didn't need to see her to know. I had heard that sound countless times in their house, her steps brisk and purposeful, echoing dominance. But here, in my hallway, they sounded invasive, drilling into the floorboards like a warning. I froze on the sofa, clutching a cushion. The footsteps approached, paused outside my door. Then, silence. I waited, hardly breathing. A minute passed. 2. When I finally stood and opened the door, the corridor was empty. Only the faint trace of perfume lingered in the air, sharp and floral. I told myself I was imagining things, but deep inside, I knew better. Over the following week, the tension grew unbearable. Daniel sent another message. You're making this harder than it needs to be. And Laura, with her polished calm, added her own, don't force us to take the next step. Each word was a veiled threat wrapped in civility. I tried to occupy myself. I cleaned the study, sorted through old sketches, polished the cedar box until it gleamed. Yet every time I placed the broken brush back inside, I felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The box was no longer just a vessel of memory, it had become a shield, a reminder that I had drawn my line and could not erase it. Even ordinary sounds seemed loaded now. The ring of the telephone, the thud of mail in the slot, the hiss of the kettle, every noise made me startle. I kept the curtains drawn longer than usual, convinced someone was watching. One afternoon, as I returned from the grocer's, I noticed an envelope tucked under my door. Inside was a photocopy of legal paperwork, a draft petition, unsigned but unmistakable. At the bottom, my name was printed in bold letters, followed by the word respondent. My knees weakened, and I sank onto the floor. So this was it. Not just silence, not just threats. They were preparing for war. I clutched the envelope to my chest and whispered to the empty room, it's coming. The storm is coming. And for the first time, I didn't feel like running. I felt my spine straighten, the broken brush heavy in my memory, and I knew the calm was over. The storm was nearly here. I knew the storm was coming. They chose a Sunday, the kind of day that used to belong to soup simmering, slow radio, and the gentle ritual of airing sheets by the window. I had opened the curtains to let in a square of pale light when the doorbell rang 3 times, fast and hard. Not a visit, a summons. I knew before I looked through the peephole. Daniel's broad shoulders first, tense beneath a fitted coat. Laura beside him, immaculate, lips lacquered the color of threat. And behind them, a man in a navy suit with a narrow briefcase and eyes that skimmed rather than saw someone trained to turn people into paperwork. I unlatched the chain. The smell of Laura's perfume arrived ahead of her, white florals with an acidic tail. It curled into the hallway and sat there like smoke. Mother. Laura's smile was small and exact. We won't take much of your time. Daniel didn't kiss my cheek. He brushed past me, the way he'd once brushed past his toys after a tantrum, stepping over the mess he'd made without apology. The lawyer waited for my nod before entering, polite as a scalpel. My living room shrank around them. The familiar things, my threadbare sofa, the wool rug worn smooth where my feet had rocked the pedals of a restoration stand long ago, suddenly looked like items in an evidence locker. On the low table sat the cedar box. Its grain caught the light like an old friend raising a hand. I placed my palm on it for steadiness and felt my pulse knocking against the wood. Tea? I asked, because habit is a skeleton that doesn't know when to stop moving. No, Laura said, already sliding documents from a leather folder. This won't take long. The lawyer cleared his throat, pitched his voice into the space. Mrs. Marlowe, I'm Mr. Keene. I'm acting on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Daniel Marlowe. That little grammatical trick turning Laura into Mrs. Daniel wasn't lost on me. He opened the briefcase and withdrew a sheaf clipped by black jaws of plastic. We prepared the transfer agreement and a durable power of attorney to simplify future decisions. Future decisions, Laura echoed, like a chorus of one. Daniel stood, arms folded, jaw working behind a fixed face. He was my son, and he looked like a stranger I was trying to remember. There was stubble where he used to smear jam. There were lines where laughter used to be. He didn't waste minutes. Mom, that house is my work, he said, low, hard, each word a coin slapped on the counter. My sweat. I met his eyes. For a second, the old film flickered, his small body asleep against mine, blue paint on his fingers, the whisper of, "Can I paint the sky, Mom?" And then the reel burned and snapped. No, I said evenly. It's my memory and my flesh. I won't sell myself to buy your love anymore. Laura exhaled in a soft, satisfied puff, as if we had arrived at the cue she'd planned for. She tapped the top page with a polished nail. Sign here, Elena. It's clean. It's sensible. It ensures stability. Her voice sugar-dusted the words that cut. Mr. Keene extracted a fountain pen with legal majesty and set it beside the signature line, angled toward me like a blade. You'll retain a life interest, he explained. Residence rights, expenses streamlined. From a tax perspective, this is optimal. I looked at the pen until it became a thin black insect I would not touch. What happens if I don't? I asked. He didn't blink. We'll have to pursue other remedies. It could get adversarial. Daniel's laugh was short, humorless. Don't make this ugly, Mum. Ugly? I repeated, tasting the word. It's already ugly. Laura's head tilted. The kindness she wore peeled back a fraction, showing the dry muscle of contempt beneath. Elena, let's not dramatize. You're not losing anything. You're merely delegating what you can't manage anymore. You should be grateful we're willing to help. Help, I said, by taking, by protecting, Laura corrected. At your age, I raised a hand. Finish that sentence and you will not like how I respond. Silence landed with a light, precise foot. The clock on the mantel coughed through a second. Somewhere below the window, someone wheeled a bin down the street. The lid clapped twice, ridiculous and human. Mr. Keene resumed his recital. If you'll initial by the tabs, no. The word left my mouth quietly, but it was a change in pressure. Ears pop, windows tremble. Daniel stepped closer, close enough for me to see the pale crescent scar on his chin from a childhood fall. Stop being stubborn, he hissed. Sign, you owe me that much. I could feel the cedar under my hand, the cool smoothness, the box humming with the weight of what it kept. I slid the lid an inch, enough to glimpse the broken brush and the folded blue scribble. The halves of the handle lay side by side like bones. Laura saw where my eyes went and barked a laugh. God, you are sentimental. It's just a stick, a broken one. You're just a delusional old woman with a broken brush. Heat rose, bright and clean, hotter than humiliation, hotter than shame. It burned the damp cotton of fear off my skin. I closed the lid with a soft click and looked at her as if she were a painting hung a little crooked. The brush may break, I said, but my hand has never trembled when defending the truth. Mr. Keene made a small professional frown, the kind you give a difficult client while calculating billable minutes. Mrs. Marlowe, I turned to Daniel. Do you hear yourself? Do you hear what the woman you chose is saying to me in my own home? Don't talk about my wife, he snapped. She's talking about me, I said, as if I were a problem to solve, as if I were a drawer to be emptied. Laura leaned back against the bookshelf, an uninvited spine to the room, titles pressed into her coat. Vasari, Berenson, de Kooning, as if the dead and the brilliant were politely trying to push her forward and out. Daniel jabbed a finger at the documents. This is for everyone's good. You could fall. You could forget. You could set the stove on, and I said. Or I could remember right now every transfer I made for you, down to the pound, down to the day. I pointed to the notebook on the side table. Do you want the numbers? Or do you want the pictures in your head to stay simple? He reddened. This is about the future. No, I said, this is about respect. Mr. Keene cleared his throat again, as if he could shoo emotion like smoke toward an open window. Let's return to the practicals. Laura pulled a fresh sheet from her leather folder and slid it across the table, her nails whispering against the paper. Durable power of attorney, she said. In case you're indisposed, we can't be running back and forth every time you have an episode. An episode, I repeated. Like the episode where I paid your rent for a year while you figured things out, or the episode where I sold a painting to cover your launch party. Which episode would you like me to reread? Her mouth thinned. There's no need to be petty. Petty is trying to steal a house with a pen. Daniel's fist hit the table then, flat-palmed, a crack of knuckles and wood. The cedar box vibrated. Mr. Keene flinched. My teacup tremored, a tiny porcelain heart. Mom, Daniel said through his teeth, stop pushing me. I'm not pushing you, I said. I'm standing still for the first time in years. The air tightened. We were still as theater. The next move would decide the scene. Laura chose it. She reached into her bag and brought out a small rectangular case, sleek, matte, purposeful. She clicked it open to reveal a portable fingerprint pad. Enough game, she said. If you don't want to sign, we'll witness your thumbprint. It's acceptable under the statute. She smiled that thin smile again. Even if your hand shakes. I actually laughed then. It wasn't a kind sound. You've thought of everything, haven't you? Because we care, she said. Because you covet, I answered. Mr. Keene shifted, discomfited by the word. Madam, please, we can avoid litigation here, but if necessary. There it is, I said softly. The true sentence inside all this. If necessary. Daniel reached for the pen. Last chance, Mom. I lifted the cedar box and cradled it in my arms as if it were something living. I could smell the faint resin of the wood, the ghost of linseed oil that has clung for decades, as faithful as any prayer. When you were 5, I said to Daniel, you sat on my lap and asked if you could paint the sky. I saved the paper where you tried. It's in here. I touched the lid. That was you before hunger taught you to rename taking as helping. Don't manipulate me, he said, voice strangled. I am reminding you. I straightened, and reminding myself, I set the box down. It made a small, sure sound. Then I reached for the metal cash tin beneath the table, the one that held my spare keys, my bank fob, my passports. I put the tin beside the documents so that everything we were about, the legal, the personal, the true, the fake, sat on the same plane. Here's what will happen, I said, my voice suddenly very calm. You will leave. You will consult whomever you like. You will do whatever you think you can do to me, and I will meet you where you take me. But you will not, today or any day, make me give you my name for your convenience. Laura's mouth opened to protest. I lifted a hand, not as plea, but as instruction. She stopped. I have been polite, I said. I have been generous. I have been weak. You believed those 3 were the same word. They are not. Mother, Laura said coldly, you are making a mistake you'll regret. Regret is a currency I'm done spending. Daniel shook his head, a quick, furious tick. You're forcing us, he said. If you'd just be reasonable. Reasonable, like allowing my home to be signed away under the pretense of stability. I stepped forward until I could see the tiny pore at the bridge of his nose, the one dot I'd kissed when he had a fever at 3. No, the room exhaled. Somewhere upstairs, a neighbor ran water through old pipes. The sound was like rain on a tin roof. I breathed with it. Mr. Pridey. Keene gathered his papers with the tidy defeat of a man who knows the war will pay better than the peace. We'll be in touch, he said. He slipped the pen back into its case, clicked it closed, and the click was a period. Laura held my gaze for a long beat. An entire past flickered between us, holiday tables, the first time she'd called me Mum, the day she'd asked for my recipe for lemon tart, as if the sharing of sugar and zest were a treaty. She let all that go without a tremor. Enjoy your little victory, she said. It will be brief. She turned, and the staccato of her heels nailed each board of my floor into the history of this moment. Daniel followed, shoulders rigid, eyes anywhere but mine. At the threshold, he paused, halfway between leaving and something like turning back. Don't do this, he said. It was almost a plea. Almost. I wanted to hand him one easy narrative he could live with. I failed you. Take what you want. I wanted to be the mother who folded rather than the woman who stood. I wanted to give him one more soft lie to keep him warm. No, I said. He stared as if I'd answered in a language he'd never learned. Then he went. The door closed. The lock turned in my hand with the softest of metallic sighs. I stood with my forehead against the cool wood, counting my breaths the way I used to count brushstrokes to calm a racing heart over a fragile glaze. In the quiet that followed, I did what I had promised. I tidied. I put the fingerprint pad back in Laura's case and set the case on the console table by the door deliberately for them to collect later. I stacked the unsigned documents and slid an elastic around them, my small domestic justice, and placed them beneath the telephone. I returned the cash tin to its shelf. I lifted the cedar box, opened it, and laid the broken brush so the halves met cleanly, as if one day a hand might make them whole. Then I went to the window. Outside, the Sunday had continued without asking our permission. A boy on a scooter streaked past. An old man paused to light a cigarette, cupping the match against the wind with tender expertise. A gull argued with a lamppost about a piece of bread. I rested my fingers on the sill and let the ordinary light touch my skin. Behind me, in the emptied air they had left, my words remained, steady as a line ruled with a carpenter's pencil. I am not the shadow in your family portrait anymore. I said it again, to the glass, to my own reflection. My mouth formed the shape of the sentence with quiet certainty. It fit me. Outside, a cloud moved, and the room brightened by a shade you might mistake for nothing if you weren't trained to see. I am trained to see. The phone vibrated against the stacked documents, a small insect shiver. A new message. I didn't need to read it to know its shape. Threat thinly iced as concern. I let it buzz through and die. They would come back, of course, with letters and filings, with accusations that fit neatly into forms. The lawyer would find ways to make love look like liability and time like incompetence. They would raise the storm they'd promised. I lifted the cedar box and carried it to the bedroom. On the dresser, I cleared a spot between the mirror and my old Florentine postcards and set the box there, centered. I placed the folded blue scribble on top Daniel Sky, still wild, still impossible, still his. My hands were steady. The room was the same. I was not. The day moved on, the ordinary missionary it always is, going door to door with light and then with dark. I let it. I made soup. I washed the cup. I stood a long time in the doorway, listening to the building breathe. When the first drop of rain hit the glass, I felt it in my bones. I know, I said into the quiet. The storm is coming. But I was ready to stand in it. The shock arrived, folded into a courier envelope, cream and official, the kind that looks heavier than it is because of what it carries. I signed for it in my robe with wet hair, a ridiculous costume for the word stamped in the upper left, petition. Inside, the language was clinical and airless. Concern for capacity, protective relief, pattern of confusion. Someone Some lawyer with neat wrists and a gift for anesthesia had arranged my life into paragraphs that suggested I could no longer understand my own best interests. There were exhibits tabbed in yellow. I laid them out on the table the way restorers lay out fragments from a ruined fresco, piece by piece, to see the picture being implied. Exhibit A sworn statement from a neighbor I barely knew. Mrs. E. Talbot from 2 doors down claiming I had tried to open the wrong mailbox on multiple occasions. Exhibit B, a screenshot of my online banking page, presented out of context, with red circles around transfers labeled rejected and failed, as if I were bumbling rather than deliberate. Exhibit C, a note from a pharmacist who'd once misheard me, he now remembered. I had asked for the wrong dosage twice in 1 month, a month that, according to my receipts, I had been in Florence. Each falsity came with a small accessory of truth to dress it up. It was clever. It was terrifying. I held the pages, and my hands shook, not with age, but with fury. I thought of the boy who had once asked if he could paint the sky, and I pictured him now, grown, drawing a storm around me with borrowed pens. By the time I reached the signature block, Laura Marlowe and Daniel Marlowe by counsel, my tea had gone cold. I placed the petition beside the cedar box on the table and watched the two of them coexist. The document that attempted to erase me and the box that remembered me whole. I didn't cry. Crying is for private collapses. Instead, I put on trousers and my old black coat and took the bus to see Anthony. Anthony Rhodes's office lived above a tailor in a narrow street that still smelled faintly of starch and wool. The bell on his door chimed the way it had 25 years ago when he'd courted Florence as a young solicitor hungry for cases and art. He had more silver now along his temples and a deeper kindness around the eyes. But when he stood to greet me, the years shortened. I was back on Via del Proconsolo, arguing with a gallery owner about humidity and glue while Anthony translated legalese into human. Elena. He said my name as if dusting it off. Sit. Tell me everything slowly. I laid the petition between us and spoke. He didn't interrupt except to ask for a date, a name, a receipt. He underlined. He starred. When I told him about the brush breaking, he didn't say it was sentimental. He wrote, brush motif photo? When I mentioned the pharmacist, he wrote the month, then shook his head. We'll get the actual dispensing logs. They won't match. Do I have to prove I'm still myself? I asked, and hated the tremor in my voice. No, he said, they have to prove you're not, but we won't wait to be defensive. He flipped the petition to a blank page, drew a line down the middle, 2 tracks, legal and human. On the legal side, rebut exhibits, produce counter evidence, document your decisional capacity, doctors, accountant, anyone with standing. On the human side, witnesses who've known you functioning, people who've seen you read contracts, negotiate work, manage your life. The human side is messier, I murmured. It's also what convinces judges, he said, especially the ones who still remember their first good teacher. Judge Harrow, I said, tasting the name from the courtroom. He recognized me. Anthony smiled small. Good. Recognition is a door. He gave me tasks the way a calm surgeon gives instruction. Firm, unhurried, gather banking logs, retrieve the pharmacist receipts, find the neighbor who really knows you. He would file an answer within the week and a motion to strike the most grotesque lies. He would ask for sanctions for bad faith if the court had appetite. And Elena, he added gently, if they smear you publicly, if this becomes gossip, we go quiet and precise. You don't shout the truth, you document it. Outside, the street was bright with cold winter sun. I tucked the plan into my coat like heat. The smear did not wait. It arrived as whispers in the greengrocer's, as a pause between 2 women by the bus stop who stopped talking when I approached. The word confused acclimated itself to my orbit. Someone. Maybe Laura, maybe the lawyer with the narrow briefcase had drafted a polite announcement to friends and concerned parties that framed their petition as an act of filial care. It read like a lamb's wool blanket. If you didn't look closely, you would miss the blade sewn into the hem. I learned this because Mrs. Rosa brought me the letter, printed and creased. She was 81 and wore her hair in a soft coil and her opinions like artillery. She had lived across from me since the year I moved in, and she had the Catholic talent for mercy paired with the Italian talent for witnesses. "They're snakes," she announced, stepping into my sitting room without waiting to be invited. "But I brought you something they did not plan for." She tapped her bag and drew out a USB stick as if it were a medal. I blinked. "Rosa, what on earth?" "My grandson installed cameras for me after the burglary last year," she said, satisfied to have a grandson useful to the plot. One points at my door. "It sees your corridor. Look." She had already texted the file to her phone. We watched together, hunched, the way people hunch around bad news. The recording was dated 08, 42 p.m., Tuesday, the week before my decision to cancel transfers. The frame showed my hallway in grayscale. Laura entered quick and precise, with a key that glittered as she turned it. She opened my door without knocking, disappeared inside for 11 minutes, then emerged holding my cedar box. She set it on the hall table, opened it, handled the contents, closed it, returned it, locked the door, left. "I don't need to tell you what that means," Rosa said. "I will swear to it. I will wear my good coat." I had to sit. Relief is its own dizziness. "Rosa," I whispered, "you are an angel with evidence." "I am a widow with a camera," she said dryly. Then her face softened. "I remember when you fixed my mother's rosary, how you glued the little cross as if it were a museum. You are not confused. You are precise. Don't let them take that from you." She pressed the USB into my hand and kissed my cheek with the unhesitating generosity of old women who no longer care to ration their tenderness. "Now," she added, "we make coffee. Evidence requires coffee." The days began to find a rhythm between blows and breath. In the mornings, another envelope. A supplemental statement from Laura describing how I had once left the kettle on. I'd turned it off. The earth had kept turning. A concern from Daniel about a wandering incident that was in fact me walking to the post to mail a letter to Florence. Anthony absorbed each one, annotated it, and called their counsel with the mild voice that, in court, would skin them. In the afternoons, there were kindnesses. A parcel from Florence. My old colleague Gianni had sent a photograph of our team standing on scaffolding beneath the Madonna of the Shadows. My younger self, a blur of concentration and fear. Tucked inside was a note on thick paper. "Per Elena, whose hands taught me patience." G. Another envelope brought a sheaf of small letters from students I had once mentored in a weekend course. Shaky, earnest handwriting, signed, "Those who believed in Elena's hands." I spread them on the table and let their ink anchor me. On Thursdays, I met Anthony in his office and we built the case like careful carpenters. He was happy, in the way good lawyers are happy when injustice gives them clarity. He deposed the pharmacist who wilted under the pharmacy's digital logs I had not visited on the days he claimed the dosage had been correct. He subpoenaed the building's passkey records. They showed Laura using a copied key to enter my flat 3 times in 1 month. He sliced the neighbor's affidavit into ribbons with phone records that placed her in Kent during one of the alleged mailbox incidents. He was never cruel. He was relentless. "War by paperwork," he said once, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "Not noble, but effective." "And Rosa?" I asked. "The best witness I could ask for," he said. "She says she will wear her pearls and tell the truth loudly." I pictured her pearls. I pictured truth said in pearls. Meanwhile, the other side escalated their theater. A young associate from Mr. Keene's firm called to propose a humane resolution. I would agree to a temporary conservatorship, just 6 months. While they sorted things, I could keep my bedroom. I could be consulted even. I hung up before the pitch could arrange itself into a lullaby. Laura wrote me directly. This isn't personal. We're protecting legacy. Think of Daniel. She attached a photo of him holding a champagne flute at some event, smiling with his mouth while his eyes checked the room for exits. Under the photo, he worked so hard, Elena. Meet us halfway. I thought of halfway as a cliff where one steps forward to be polite and the wind helps with the rest. At night, I reread the letters from Florence. The phrase, those who believed in Elena's hands became a charm I could hold in my mouth when I was alone. Those who believed, those who believed. I slept with the cedar box on the dresser where I could see it when I woke, the folded blue sky on top catching the first slice of morning. But I am not a heroine without doubts. Doubt is the currency of motherhood. It returns even when you ban it. It returned one evening in the bath, when the water went tepid and the ceiling cracked a little as old houses do. I saw myself as they wanted the court to see me. Small, wet, old. I imagined losing the case. I imagined Laura cataloging my books, Daniel deciding which souvenirs of my life were worth storage and which should go to a skip. I imagined keys I had owned my entire adult life hanging on a hook by a door I no longer controlled. And then I imagined something worse, winning and losing him anyway. I cried then quietly, because it was private and honest and cost me nothing but salt. When the water cooled, I got out, wrapped myself in a towel, and out of a reflex I did not know was still mine, I stood at the mirror and practiced saying my own name the way one practices testimony. I am Elena Marlowe. The steam wrote it on the glass for a second and then let it go. The pre-trial conference came up on the calendar like a storm marked in red. Anthony wanted to preview our strongest strikes. He also wanted them to see the witness list far enough in advance to become careful. Careful opponents make sloppy mistakes, he said. 2 nights before the conference, Rosa knocked again, histrionically soft, as if softness could disguise the heat in her. Another thing, she announced, handing me a paper bag. Inside was a small, battered notebook. Your son dropped this in the bin behind the building. Don't look at me like that. I was throwing out onion skins and saw the leather. I am not a saint. I retrieved it. It was Daniel's. His old notebook from the first company, back when it had been ideas rather than invoices. On one page, calculations. On another, a list of potential investors' family with my name underlined 3 times. On the last page, a draft email to a bank officer arguing for an increase in his limit, promising collateral likely within quarter, transfer of parental asset imminent. The date matched the dinner where the brush broke. I shouldn't be surprised, I said, but my mouth tasted of iron anyway. Anthony's face, when I handed it to him the next day, folded into something almost like pity. Sometimes evidence hurts twice. We chose not to file the notebook yet. Keep it for cross-examination, he said. There are blows you save for when the room expects merely a nudge. Between law and life, there were still small, obedient hours. I made soup and left a bowl for Rosa. I mended a loose hem. I cleaned the little brass plate on my door. I sat by the window and watched a young mother teach her child to look both ways before crossing. Her hand out firm, the child's head swiveling too dramatically and then laughing at his own seriousness. I wanted to tell her, keep that hand firm longer than you think necessary, but she wouldn't have heard me from the second floor. That evening, I opened the cedar box and, for the first time since it had broken, I lifted the brush without flinching. The halves met cleanly in my hands, and I imagined a future where someone might join them with gold, kintsugi for a tool. The break would not be hidden, it would be gilded and named. I pressed the 2 pieces together and felt, without wanting to sound poetic, the old steadiness in my fingers, the discipline that once held 4 centuries of paint and did not shake. A ping from my phone broke the moment. An email, subject line, proposed settlement. I didn't need to open it to know the shape. a generous allowance, a consultation clause, a press release about mutual love. I closed the phone. I stood at the window until the square of light left the floor. On the dresser, the letters from Florence lay in a fan. I read one at random. Dear Miss Marlowe, you taught me that patience is not passivity, that waiting can be a kind of action, that hands can argue quietly until the truth appears. Please keep arguing. Those who believed in Elena's hands. I smiled, and it felt like courage scaled to the day. Anthony called at 10. Last thing, he said. Tomorrow, when you walk into that room, remember, you're not there to win your child back. You're there to win yourself back. They're different trials. I said yes because I understood. And after we hung up, I sat a long time with that difference. My heart was not an idiot. It insisted on a third possibility where both trials could be won. I let it insist. Hearts like to labor, but I also folded the notion and put it in the box with the brush and the blue sky, a relic among relics. Before bed, I placed the petition on the floor and, with a pencil, I wrote the date of each lie beside the margin, then the true date of what had actually happened. It was a restorer's habit. Annotate, layer, correct. It calmed me. Then I looked at myself in the mirror again and spoke once, low. I am Elena Marlowe. The apartment breathed. The rain began. Somewhere on the landing, Rose's radio murmured a hymn. I turned off the light and asked the room the question that had been crouching there for days, waiting to be let out. When the judge looks at me tomorrow, will he see a woman or a case file? And which of those will I be strong enough to be? It happened on a Tuesday, the kind of day that looks harmless in its grayness. The postman slid a bundle through the slot, and I sorted it the way I always did. Bills to the left, catalogs to the bin, envelopes with legal weight to the cedar box for later. But one envelope felt wrong, too thick, too official, the kind of paper that already assumes authority. I slid it open with the letter knife. Out slid a copy of the so-called power of attorney. The paper was heavy stock, watermarked faintly with the firm's crest. My own name leapt at me from the top in bold capitals, Elena Marlowe. Then, below, a signature, my signature. Or what they thought was mine. My breath caught. I lifted the page closer. At first glance, the handwriting was flawless. Every loop, every slant imitated with surgical precision. Whoever had forged this had studied me. Perhaps Daniel had handed over one of my old letters. Perhaps Laura had dug through my drawers. But then my eyes snagged on a detail. The date, April 12, 2015. My heart slammed against my ribs. My mouth went dry. I pressed the page flat against the table and whispered aloud, "No, no, you fools." April 2015. That was the month I had been in Florence restoring a minor canvas for the Carmelite convent. I had photographs, receipts, a train ticket from Pisa to Florence with the date stamped clear. I had stood on scaffolding that very day, paint dust in my hair, writing notes in Italian. There was no way, no possible way, I could have signed this document in London. The room tilted slightly as I sank into the chair. The paper crinkled under my tightening grip. The edges cut into my palm. They forged me. They thought no one would notice. They thought I was too old, too tired, too confused to see the flaw. My pulse thundered in my ears, so loud I almost missed the tick of the clock. Each second fell heavy, metallic, like nails being driven into a coffin. I stared at the forged date until the numbers swam. I was in Florence, I whispered. I was in Florence. I can prove it. The air around me sharpened. The fear that had coiled inside my chest loosened, replaced by something hotter, brighter. Rage, yes, but also clarity. I felt the weight of the paper, slick and cold, in my hand. My fingers trembled, not with weakness, but with the knowledge of what this meant. They've built their case on a lie with my name scrawled across it, and that lie carries its own poison. It will kill them before it kills me. I stood and paced the room, the forged document clutched like a weapon. The cedar box sat on the table, silent witness. I opened it and laid the paper beside the broken brush and Daniel's childish drawing of the sky. Relics and betrayals side by side, past and present. I bent over the box, whispering as if the brush itself could hear. They've trapped themselves. They've already lost. Images rushed through my mind. Laura dictating, Daniel nodding, the lawyer sliding this forged paper into a folder with confidence. I saw them smirking, certain of my silence, certain the court would believe them over me. But they hadn't counted on Florence. They hadn't counted on the truth I carried in receipts, contracts, journals, and the memory of stone steps under my shoes. My chest heaved. I pressed the heels of my palms into my eyes, steadying myself. What now? Do I crumble under this? Do I let them bury me under lies? Or do I rise? The answer came with startling certainty. I picked up the document again, held it to the light, tracing the forged curves of my name. Then I pressed it flat against the cedar box, as if pinning it to history itself. They've buried themselves, I said aloud, my voice steady, ringing in the small flat. Not me. The flat turned into an arsenal, not of weapons, but of papers, files, and proof. Every surface bore a stack. Bank statements, receipts, old contracts, letters from Florence, Rose's USB stick queued up with the grainy footage of Laura breaking into my home. My kitchen table looked like a war map. Dates circled in red ink. Margins filled with Anthony's notes in his clipped handwriting. Evidence turned into weapons, sharpened to cut lies apart. At night, I lay awake and imagined myself on the witness stand, my voice quivering, my hands twisting in my lap. The judge leaning forward, eyes narrowing. Laura smiling that patient, poisonous smile. Daniel looking anywhere but at me. The fear sat like stone in my chest. The next morning, Anthony arrived with his leather satchel, scattering the flat with the smell of strong coffee and rain. He stood over the piles and nodded. This is what we needed. You've done more work than half my clients combined. Work doesn't silence a shaking voice, I murmured. He studied me for a moment. Then he said gently, Elena, this isn't about being perfect. You've spent your life restoring paintings, other people's visions, other people's mistakes. This time, you're restoring yourself. You're not defending a canvas. You're defending your life. His words struck something raw and true. I felt my throat tighten, but I nodded. Then I must be precise. He left me with an assignment. Practice, out loud, no matter how foolish it felt. Find your steadiness before they try to take it from you, he said. That evening, I stood in front of the mirror. My reflection stared back. A woman with tired eyes, silver strands escaping her bun, shoulders rounded from years of bending over canvases. My first words snagged in my throat. My name is Elena Marlowe. The voice that emerged was thin, uncertain, betraying me. I flushed, furious at my own weakness. I tried again, louder. I am Elena Marlowe. The syllables trembled, as if they too were afraid of being erased. I pressed my palms against the dresser and leaned closer to the mirror. I am not confused. I am not incompetent. I am not broken. Still, my voice cracked. I closed my eyes and remembered the nights when I had stayed silent, when Daniel had called me selfish for hesitating, when Laura had twisted my kindness into obligation. All those times I had chosen to swallow the words, believing silence was love. Not anymore. I steadied my breath, lifted my chin, and began again. This time, I pictured myself back in Florence at 25, brush in hand, restoring the Madonna's face. My hand hadn't trembled then. Why should it tremble now? I am Elena Marlowe, I said firmly. I was in Florence on April 12, 2015. I have the receipts. I did not sign that paper. They forged me, and I will prove it. The room echoed with my words. My voice no longer sounded like a stranger's. It sounded like mine. I repeated the sentences until my throat grew hoarse, until the rhythm of them felt carved into my ribs. At one point, Rosa knocked on the door with a basket of rolls. She overheard me through the wood, my voice rising and falling. She smiled, pressed the basket into my hands, and said, "Good, say it until it feels like bone." The next day, I recorded myself on Anthony's suggestion. The first playback made me wince, too soft, too rushed. But on the 10th recording, something shifted. My voice carried weight. When I played it back, I didn't hear a frightened old woman. I heard testimony. Between rehearsals, I prepared the evidence with Anthony. Each receipt was cataloged, each transfer annotated. We built binders, blue for finances, green for travel, red for personal witnesses. Anthony compared it to mending a shattered frame. We're piecing back the truth so the judge can see the whole picture. I smiled faintly, like gilding cracks with gold. Kintsugi, he said. Exactly. Letters kept arriving. Another from Florence, this one signed by an archivist. Elena restored with precision and clarity unmatched, April 2015. I slipped it into the green binder, its timing perfect. My allies, unseen yet strong, walked into court with me on paper. One evening, exhaustion hit me like a wave. I collapsed onto the sofa, surrounded by files. My eyes wandered to the cedar box on the table. I opened it, tracing the broken brush, lifting the folded scrap of Daniel's blue sky. For a long time, I stared at those crooked lines. Once he believed he could paint the sky. Once he believed in me. I pressed the paper flat against my palm. "I'm not fighting only for myself," I whispered. "I'm fighting for the woman who carried this memory, who gave everything. She deserves to be heard." The fear didn't vanish. It still lingered in the corners of the room. But with every repetition, every binder, every recorded line, I felt it shrinking. I was not erasing the fear. I was learning to stand beside it. On the final night before court, Anthony stopped by to deliver his closing advice. He found me at the mirror again, standing straighter, my voice steady as I declared, "My name is Elena Marlowe. I remember everything, and I will not be silenced." He watched me, eyes narrowing with quiet pride. Then he said softly, "Elena, this time you're not restoring art. You're restoring yourself." I turned, meeting his gaze. My pulse thudded, but it was not fear, it was anticipation. "I've been waiting for this moment my whole life," I said, and I meant it. The courtroom smelled faintly of varnish and coal dust, as if the air itself had been preserved in some archive. Rows of wooden benches groaned under the weight of bodies leaning forward, whispering, waiting. The judge's bench rose above us, stark under the harsh white light. When the bailiff called, "All rise," every scrape of chair legs sounded like 100 violins tuning in dissonance. I rose with them, my knees stiff but my spine straight. My palms pressed against the cedar box resting on my lap, the broken brush and Daniel's childhood drawing tucked safely inside. They were not evidence in the legal sense. They were evidence in the human sense, proof that I still carried memory, love, and identity. The gavel struck once, and silence fell like a curtain. Mr. Keene, the plaintiff's lawyer, moved first. He adjusted his tie, squared his shoulders, and let his words roll out with the ease of a man who had rehearsed his performance before a mirror. "Your Honor, this case is about care, about responsibility, about protecting an aging woman who has shown signs of decline. My clients, Daniel and Laura Marlowe, seek only to safeguard her well-being and preserve the family estate from unfortunate mismanagement." His gaze flicked toward me, warm and pitying, like a doctor explaining prognosis to a patient already marked for the grave. Daniel sat beside him, jaw clenched, hands folded too neatly. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Laura, immaculate in cream, leaned slightly forward, as if to catch every approving nod. My heart clenched. That is my son, I thought. That is my blood on the wrong side of the room. Anthony stood, no theatrics, no pity, just the deliberate voice I had known since Florence. This case, he said evenly, is about power, about whether an independent woman, Elena Marlowe, will be stripped of her autonomy under the pretense of care. We will show the court evidence that these claims of incapacity are false. We will show deliberate forgery. We will show intrusion, coercion, and fabrication. And we will show that Mrs. Fand Marlowe is fully competent to manage her life. He gestured to me. I lifted my chin, met the judge's eyes, and for a fleeting second saw a flicker of recognition, the same flicker from our first encounter. The plaintiff's first witness was Mrs. Talbot, the neighbor from 2 doors down. She shuffled to the stand, wringing her hands. I saw her try to open my mailbox, she claimed, her voice thin. Twice, she seemed confused. I thought, perhaps dementia? Anthony rose for cross. Mrs. Talbot, may I ask where you were living in July of last year? In the building, of course. He handed her a document. Is this not a copy of your rental agreement in Kent, dated 6 months duration, beginning June? Her lips parted, eyes darting. Murmurs rippled through the benches. No further questions, Anthony said. Mrs. Talbot wilted in the witness chair. Next came the pharmacist. He claimed I had repeatedly asked for the wrong dosage of medication. Anthony asked, which days did this occur? The pharmacist listed 2 dates. Anthony slid the pharmacy's official dispensing log across the table. On both days, no prescriptions had been filled for me, the pharmacist stammered. Perhaps I misremembered. Or perhaps, Anthony said coolly, your memory is less reliable than my client's. The courtroom rustled with subdued laughter. Anthony called Rosa next. She wore her pearls and her conviction. She placed her hand on the Bible with the solemnity of a general swearing before battle. I saw Laura Marlowe use a key to enter Elena's flat without permission, she declared. She opened a cabinet, removed a box, rifled through it, then returned it. My security camera recorded the entire event. Here is the footage. The bailiff wheeled a monitor. The grainy black and white recording flickered to life. There was Laura, unmistakable, her posture taut, her movements precise. There was the cedar box in her hands. The courtroom inhaled collectively. Laura's face hardened, but she said nothing. Then came the archivist from Florence, testifying via video link. Behind him hung shelves of cataloged manuscripts. Yes, Mrs. Marlowe was with us on April 12, 2015, he said firmly. She signed restoration notes in my presence. I still have the register. Anthony displayed the forged power of attorney on the overhead projector. Dated the same day, he said, his voice sharp as glass. The contrast was devastating. Even the judge leaned forward. Finally, Anthony called me. My stomach clenched as I rose, the cedar box warm against my palms. I placed it on the witness stand beside me. My fingers brushed the broken brush inside, and I felt steadier. Daniel testified against me. He spoke of my forgetfulness, of episodes when I supposedly repeated questions or misplaced things. She isn't the woman she was, he said, his voice brittle. She needs help, whether she admits it or not. I searched his face for some crack, some sign of regret, but his eyes slid away. The boy who had once asked if he could paint the sky was gone, replaced by this stranger who measured my life in assets. The pain cut deep, but it clarified me. If he will not remember me, I must remember myself. When Anthony asked me to speak, I rose fully, spine straight, palms braced on the wood. The courtroom blurred for a moment, then sharpened into focus. My name is Elena Marlowe, I began. My voice was steady. I am 62 years old. I am not perfect. I misplaced my glasses. I forget whether I've salted the soup, but I remember who I am. I remember every sacrifice I made for my son. I remember every canvas I restored, every contract I signed, every receipt I kept. And I remember exactly where I was on April 12, 2015, Florence, Italy, not London, not here. I paused, then placed my hand on the cedar box. I have spent my life saving paintings others thought were lost. Today, I am saving myself from those I once called family. I am not a walking bank account. I am not a shadow in their household portrait. I am Elena Marlowe. I have a name. I have dignity. I have freedom. And I will not surrender them. The silence that followed was alive, electric. Even the judge's pen hung motionless above his notes. The judge's gavel struck once. His voice rang clear. The court finds the claims of incapacity unsubstantiated. The alleged power of attorney is deemed fraudulent. The court rejects the petition in its entirety. Ownership and autonomy remain with Mrs. Elena Marlowe. He paused, looking at me directly. This court affirms your right to live as you choose. Another strike of the gavel. Final, irrevocable. My knees nearly gave, but relief surged through me like light breaking glass. My breath shuddered out, not bitter, not sweet, something beyond both. I looked at Anthony. He nodded once, his eyes warm. Rosa dabbed her cheeks with a handkerchief, whispering, Grazie, Dio. Daniel slumped, face pale, Laura's hand gripping his arm like claws. They rose without looking at me, their figures shrinking as they walked away. The emptiness they left behind was both hollow and strangely liberating. I touched the cedar box, tracing its grain. For the first time in years, the weight on my chest lifted. Through the high courtroom windows, sunlight slanted in, sharp and clean. I smiled, a small, astonished thing, because I realized I could. The city hummed as if nothing had happened. Cars rolled by. People hurried home with groceries. The ordinary traffic of living continued without pause. Yet when I unlocked my door that evening, the flat greeted me with a silence so deep it felt like stepping into the hollow of a drum after the last strike. I set the cedar box on the table, placed my bag on the chair, and sat in the dark without bothering to switch on the lamp. My body still carried the echo of the courtroom, the gavel's crack, the shifting of benches, the rustle of papers, but here there was only stillness. The brush lay inside the box, broken as always. I lifted it gently and let the halves rest across my palms. The wood was cool, the bristles bent, my eyes blurred. I thought of the words I had spoken in that echoing chamber. I am not a bank account. I am Elena Marlowe. They had carried me through. They had saved me. But now, in the hush of my empty flat, a different question surfaced. I won the case. I saved my name. But what of my son? I pressed the brush tighter until my fingers hurt. The memory of Daniel's voice on the stand replayed, stripped of warmth, calling me forgetful, incapable. Each word had been another fracture, deeper than any forged paper or false witness. Was the bond between us broken beyond repair? Had it died in that courtroom when he turned his face away? I saved myself, I whispered into the dark. But did I lose him forever? The clock ticked, indifferent. Outside, someone's laughter rose and fell on the street. I felt the hollowness inside me widen. I had imagined victory would taste sweet, that when the judge struck his gavel in my favor, I would breathe like a free bird. And yes, relief had flooded me. But now that relief curdled into something else, a space vast and aching, like the quiet after a storm that has flattened everything in its path. I placed the brush back into the box and closed the lid. My reflection in the window glass looked older than I remembered, lined not by age alone, but by grief. Is maternal love meant to survive even this? Or has it perished under the weight of betrayal? I stood slowly, made myself a cup of tea. The kettle hissed and clicked off. Steam curled upward, ghostly in the dark kitchen. I carried the cup back to the window, sipped carefully. The bitterness grounded me. Perhaps healing doesn't come with a verdict. Perhaps it begins with something smaller. The warmth of porcelain in my hands, the choice to sip, the choice to keep breathing. I opened the window. Cold air rushed in, carrying the smell of rain-soaked pavement. For the first time that day, I let my lungs fill completely. The night pressed close, but it was not hostile. It was simply there, waiting. I touched the sill, rough beneath my fingertips, and whispered to the darkness, I am still here. The words didn't answer the ache for my son. They didn't erase the emptiness where his love used to be, but they anchored me. They were a beginning, fragile as a seed. Behind me, the cedar box sat closed, the broken brush inside. I would keep it, fracture and all, not as a wound, but as a reminder. Things can be broken and still carried. Yet even as I tried to steady myself, the truth pressed down hard. I had defended my freedom. I had won. But the hollow left by Daniel's betrayal gaped wide, and I knew it would not heal quickly. I set down the tea, pressed my forehead against the cold glass, and allowed the thought I had been avoiding to surface fully. Perhaps the bond died in that courtroom. The room answered only with silence. And I admitted it, softly, painfully, to myself. The emptiness weighs heavier than the verdict. The apartment in London is gone now. The heavy curtains, the walls that echoed with silence, the kitchen where I practiced my testimony. It all belongs to someone else. I sold it without hesitation. The day I handed over the keys, I felt no grief, only relief, as if the bricks themselves had sighed and let me go. Now I live in Florence again, in a small studio on a quiet street not far from the Uffizi. The building smells faintly of coffee and stone, its stairwell cool even in summer. My room is modest, a single bed, a wooden desk, a shelf of worn books. But the window opens toward the museum dome, and when the bells toll, they carry the city's centuries with them. In the mornings, I walk barefoot across the cool tiles and open the shutters. Light floods in, warm and golden, as if Tuscany itself has chosen to paint me awake. I lift a cup of cappuccino, steam curling upward, and I breathe it in slowly. The cup is light in my hand, nothing like the heavy phone I once clutched waiting for my son's demands. This is the symmetry of my life, weight traded for weightlessness. I've begun keeping a journal again. I write in brown ink, the color of old sketches, each page filling with lines that belong to me alone, not translations of others, not numbers from transfers, not court testimony. My own voice, steady across the paper. At first, the words were stiff, as if I were afraid they would betray me. Now they flow, some mornings quick as a river, other mornings gentle as a stream. Writing for no one but myself feels like a luxury greater than any inheritance. Afternoons belong to children. A small art room above the piazza opens its doors twice a week, free to anyone under 12. I volunteer there, teaching little hands how to hold a brush, how to mix blue and white to find the sky. Their laughter fills the room with a chaos that feels pure. When a girl once asked me, "Can I paint the sun purple?" I smiled and said, "Of course, paint the world as you see it." It is the answer I once gave Daniel when he wanted to paint the sky. That memory used to cut me open. Now it feels like a thread binding past to present, loose but not broken. On the wall of my studio hangs the broken brush. I had it framed in simple glass, mounted against white. At first, I thought it would pain me to see it daily, a reminder of fracture. But instead, it speaks to me differently now. It is no longer a relic of betrayal. It is the emblem of survival. A brush can break, but the hand, the will can endure. Visitors sometimes ask, why keep it? I only smile, because only I know the weight it once carried and the freedom it now represents. In quiet hours, I still think of Daniel. I would be lying if I claimed otherwise. Sometimes I wonder where he walks now, if he glances at the sky and remembers the paper I kept all these years. Perhaps one day he will regret what he did. Perhaps not. But I have stopped waiting for apology, stopped starving for crumbs of recognition. That hunger nearly killed me. Freedom, I've learned, is not the absence of longing, but the refusal to chain yourself to it. Evenings in Florence are gentle. I sit at a cafe with a notebook, watching the light fade across the Arno. Couples stroll, Artists pack up their canvases. Waiters call out prego as they set down wine. I sip slowly, writing fragments. Sentence, a sketch, a memory. Each word feels like a brushstroke reclaiming the canvas of my life. I remember the courtroom, the sound of the gavel, the weight of the judge's words. That victory gave me back my name, but not my wholeness. Wholeness is what I'm painting now, in the ordinary moments, the hiss of coffee, the laughter of children, the rustle of paper under my pen. Sometimes tourists drift into the art room where I volunteer. They ask my name. When I answer, some recognize it, recalling an exhibition catalog or an article on restoration from decades past. They smile, sometimes ask for a story. I give them one, brief and light. And when they leave, I return to the children, knowing my name will outlast the lies that tried to bury it. This is the life I chose. Smaller, quieter, yet mine. No petitions, no forged papers, no false caretakers. Just paint, ink, air, and freedom. I once thought my family portrait was fixed. Mother, son, daughter-in-law, smiling for the world while shadows told the truth. That portrait is gone now, and I no longer mourn it. I am painting a new one, brushstroke by brushstroke. It has no borders, no frames, no forced smiles. Only colors, free and unrestrained. As I write this, the bells begin to ring for evening prayer. The sound fills the studio, steady and deep. I look up at the framed brush, fractured but shining in its new place, and I realize it has become something more than memory. It has become testimony. I whisper into the quiet, I once lost myself in the shadows of family. Now I paint my life again in colors of freedom, and for the first time, the words feel not like defiance, but like peace. You've walked with me through shadows and fire, through the silence of betrayal and the thunder of the courtroom. Now you sit with me here in Florence in a small studio filled with light, and I want to speak to you, not as a figure in a story, not as a name on a petition, but as a woman who has lived and survived. If you have ever been dismissed, patronized, or treated as though you were invisible, remember this. You have the right to rise, even if the ones pressing you down share your blood, even if the voices trying to silence you sound familiar. For too many years, I mistook silence for peace. I thought that if I gave enough time, money, forgiveness, love would return to me. I thought that sacrifice was proof of devotion. But silence is not peace, and sacrifice without respect is not love. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you felt that sting of being treated as an object, a wallet, a background figure in someone else's life. And maybe, like me, you told yourself, it's fine. They'll see me one day. They'll thank me one day. I told myself that for 20 years. The day never came. What came instead was a forged signature, a courtroom, and the harshest truth. I had lost myself. But here's what I want you to carry from my story. Losing yourself does not mean you cannot be found again. The day I stood before the judge, I declared, I am not a bank account. I am Elena Marlowe. That was not just testimony, it was rebirth. And if I can stand there trembling yet unbroken, so can you. So I ask you, heart to heart, if it were you, would you dare to keep the brush of freedom in your own hands? Would you dare to paint your life on your own terms, no matter who tried to seize it from you? I don't ask this to provoke guilt or shame. I ask because I know how terrifying it feels, how heavy that brush can seem, especially when everyone around you insists you put it down. But I also know the miracle that happens when you grip it anyway, when you choose color over shadow, truth over silence. And now, I want something from you. Not money, not allegiance, just your voice. Share this story if it moved you. Write a comment with your thoughts, your anger, your sorrow, your hope. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of ordinary people fighting not for fame or riches, but for dignity, for freedom, for the right to breathe as themselves. Stories matter. They remind us we're not alone in our battles. And when you add your voice, you help someone else realize they are not alone either. So here I close my book. My journey for now is finished. I have sold the house, left the shadows, hung the broken brush on my wall, not as a wound, but as a banner. My hands are steady again. My days are my own. But your journey continues, perhaps even now. You feel that stir inside you, the whisper that says, enough. Perhaps you are ready to lift your own brush, no matter how heavy it feels. And if you do, remember this. My story ends here, but perhaps it is only the first sketch of your freedom.